So the rabbit, he got caught up in a whole big thing, an emotional tangent. The rabbit, it was an anniversary, and they were staying at the place in the Adirondacks. The rabbit and his friends, long after he had left the man, and it was almost a decade after he had left the man, and he was with his friends, and they found that they loved to have a annual retreat to the Adirondacks, the lower Adirondacks in New York State, the lower Adirondacks. And the rabbit, he was enjoying his whole entire thing, but he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. They had this they said it was a King David mirror. No one ever heard of it before, but these people, they were Yugoslavian, and they were descendants from royalty, but they were still weren't royalty because they killed all the royals and they became communists. So they were royal over things. They were over thing royal. They were like a white trash kind of a royal that doesn't have any. It's like a baseball card from like a 1988 forward in time. 1987, 1986, 1985, 1984, 1982, 1983. Yeah, if I have to get to 1981, if you want a secure baseball card price of like $1, but it's a good thing. But the rabbit, he was verklempt, he was verklos, he was verkschlanstent, because the sky was blue, but he still felt drab. And the sky was blue, but he still felt drab. It's a terrible thing when you should see the blue skies and the horizon, and they're so beautiful, and you still feel drab, as if the heavy clouds are still pressing down upon you. But the rabbit, no one knew he had caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, except for one little girl. It was like another girl, but it was like a adolescent, kind of like an 18, 19-year-old maid girl. And she saw him. She didn't see his reflection. He saw his reflection. She didn't see his reflection, and she was convinced he was a vampire. But then they came together at the church, and she was still quivering, and the grandmother was asking, "Why are you quivering, little child? Why are you quivering?" And the rabbit was there, and he was in a pew, and he looked over from his hymn book. He was propped up on a hymn book. And he was wondering, he was twitching his whiskers, he was wondering, why is this thing, what's this confrontation? And it turned out the grandmother was almost accusing the man, but the man wasn't there. And the rabbit, he didn't understand. And the girl, she said, it doesn't really matter, because no one's going to listen anyway, in the long run. And the rabbit, he stepped back down off the hymn book. He was propped up looking at the hymn book at the altercation, and he stepped back down, and he's got back down to his pew, but he was reminiscent just right then and there of the time that he caught a glimpse of himself in the full-length mirror, and he was very, very worried, because it looked as though to him he had a very, very fat head, and he didn't know at what time his neck had grown so robust and so, broad or chunky with layers of fat drooling down, stalactites of cellulite, stalactites dripping off my jowls. It's not a good thing. Everybody said it wasn't going to be too good, but I didn't realize when I arrived at the dripping stalactite of jowl, it would be this bad. It was a bad thing. Everybody was saying it would be good, it's going to be bad. I didn't understand until I got there, and I looked into the full-length mirror, and I said, my goodness gracious, this kind of a thing should be killed as like a Loch Ness monster kind of a thing with the jowl droop. So much uniform jowl droop. This much jowl droop, it's not a good thing. No one was comparing this kind of a jowl droop in a turkey neck situation to an Adonis or a Greek god or anybody that would be you would follow, or stake, hitch your wagon up to their star, or follow into whatever, the Valhalla, whatever they were going to do. If they were going to go do something, they would not follow the man with the turkey neck jowl and the broad droop. But this was not a thing, It didn't really matter, because the rabbit was like, what am I going to do at this point? I'm addicted to the Fruit Loop diet, and too much alcohol imbibing of the alcohol, and the rabbit, he was like, So he looked again, and he looked in the full length. He tried to hoist up and suck up his diaphragm and fill his diaphragm up with his broad shoulders and his pectoral muscles and his chest, his cavity. He tried to fill his cavity with air, but he couldn't get it filled up so good, so his belly didn't look like a giant beer belly or a bloated, abdomen of a dying liver man and a kidney disorder man. But it didn't matter, because the rabbit, he had big jowls, big giant fat rabbit jowl, big rabbit cheek jowl, and it was a bad thing. Everybody said it was a bad thing. You should not have eaten so many carbs and so many grams of sugar. And the rabbit, he looked out and his ears were twitching, and his ears were still pink. His nice inlaid, there's like a very bright pink to the inside of the ear of the rabbit, and the rabbit would cast forward the pink, and it would almost mesmerize the crowd. And they would, sometimes they would, almost fall into a mesmerized state where they didn't even care what was said. It didn't matter, because it didn't matter what you were going to say. It didn't have to be that profound, because you had the ears were and they would rotate, they would oscillate almost like an oscillation of a pink, a very, very broad, a very bright, very robust, a very ruby-esque. It was a pink, it had a hue, a good hue, a very rich pink. But it didn't matter to the rabbit, because, if he twitched his nose, if he wiggled his whiskers, everybody would, it didn't matter. They still took the photographs. So the man, he was like a chauffeur at this point in another area of his life, because he was like a chauffeur. He wasn't even not a chauffeur, because the man was as if he was a chauffeur of somebody would be pushed in a shopping cart to careen into an obstruction. If you needed a man dressed up in a chauffeur costume with a chauffeur hat, it would push you were inside of a shopping cart, and it would push you downgrade a macadam slope that you would coast in the shopping cart, and you would careen and smash into a hedgerow or an abutment of some sort. This would be good for you. If this would happen to you, this would be good. But as far as the rabbit goes, the rabbit thought he was some kind of a, Starsky and Hutch mesmer royalty. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter if he was or if he wasn't. The only thing that really counted as far as the rabbit was concerned by the time they got to this point was that he could stay out of all of his legal entanglements. And this is the only thing we were worried about. Because the rabbit, in this chapter of this story, after all the other bullshit and everything we thought, everything we predicted, everything we supposed and we adjuncted to, it's as if you're like a lawyer and you say, I adjunct to this. It means I attach to it in a certain form of a fashion, but not fully. So it's a lawyer-esque ploy. I attach, but not fully. So I adjunctioned, but no one cared. It's, it was as if the rabbit was a trapeze artist working over a netless, a strewn, jagged bunch of glass. They took a bunch of windshields and smashed them with sledgehammers and said, if you want to fall off your trapeze, then you could fall into the jagged glass.